Welcome, friends, to our coffee conversation around two-year schools and church-based campus ministries. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. My name is Megan Otto. I am the campus minister at University United Methodist Church in Austin, Texas, which serves the University of Texas at Austin across the street. I've been there this is my 7th school year, and I'm really fascinated by the church-based campus ministry model, and I think that there's a lot of places that could really benefit from that. Colleen, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Colleen Halligan-Priniger. I am an elder with membership in the Upper New York Annual Conference. I currently serve in California. I don't actually know what conference I'm in. I think maybe Cal Nevada. I have membership in Upper New York, though, so there you go. At Stanford University, I serve as the Director of Student Engagement and Associate Minister for Memorial Church in the Office for Religious Life.
Great. And how many years have you been there, Colleen?
Almost one.
Almost one.
Yeah, actually, Saturday is my 1 year date. Before that, I served at Shenandoah University. I ran a Lilly-funded youth theology institute out of the Spiritual Life Office at Shenandoah, which is a small Methodist university in Virginia. And before that, I served as the United Methodist Ecumenical Chaplain at Syracuse University in my home conference of Upper New York.
That's great. Thanks, Colleen. Michelle, tell me about yourself.
So I'm the director of the Wesley Center at Paris Junior College in Northeast Texas, and an associate pastor at FUMC Paris. I have 2 cats and they are crazy. I think because we are all quarantined together in this little space. So I've been in Paris for 2 years now.
Great. That's great. Thanks, Michelle. And Meredith, tell me about yourself.
I am the director of what we call the UCF Wesley Foundation at Navarro College in Corsicana, Texas. I've been there for 5 years. I'm also recently went on staff for the college to develop a program for all the students that comes out of a program that I've been doing at the Wesley Foundation. So I have 2 jobs right now.
That's great. That's great.
Which is a little stressful.
Could join us as we talk about doing campus ministry, not only during a pandemic, but just with new generations of students every year and how that changes a lot. So, Colleen, can you tell us a little bit about the book that you wrote last year?
Yeah, so I was approached by Discipleship Ministries in their lay servant division because folks, as we all know, that funding for campus ministry in the denomination is spotty at best and is declining in a lot of places as we spiral further and further into existential and theological crisis.
Yeah.
So a lot of congregations, or some congregations, had approached the National Lay Servant folks to say, like, do you have trainings on how our campus ministries are being defunded, or our Wesley foundations are being defunded or underfunded. We want to help. How do we help? We have no idea what to do. And so writing this book, and it was a lay servant course. So I wrote a text to support a lay servant course, which is now, I'm teaching it now, and I taught it once before, to help begin the process from a congregational perspective of discernment toward establishing or creating or connecting or expanding a congregationally based campus ministry. So it's really written from the perspective of rooted in the congregational world, particularly like lay servants or lay folks and clergy and congregations that are like, we want to help. How do we even begin? So it really is meant to be sort of like a beginning for folks that don't have experience in that area. So in most of it is really just based on case studies. So like you, Megan, and Joey, and a lot of our colleagues across the connection, and actually most of the connections you gave me, which is awesome. Oh, I love your cat.
No.
I have two that are tuxedo cats. They're Frog and Toad. Yeah, so really just interviewing folks mostly across the US, and then one case study in Norway with our friends from Oslo.
Yeah.
So yeah, not as a model, case studies I think are really useful as inspiration. I don't think they're useful as prescriptive, but to say like, there's some really amazing work happening in a lot of different contexts at 4-year schools, at 2-year schools, with a variety of connections. How can we listen to these stories and then think about our own context?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thanks, Colleen.
And you have 2 tuxedo cats. Are they Frog and Toad?
They are not.
Oh.
They're Star Trek names.
Hey. Sorry.
Amazing. That's amazing. Meredith, tell me about doing campus ministry in a small town for a 2-year college. Like, what are the challenges and the opportunities that you have for that there?
Well, I think I would classify myself as a practical theologian. So if that helps you kind of think about kind of how I've approached this.
Yeah.
I started by first just observing what was going on. Like I had a lot of ministry experience, but I had never worked in 2-year schools. And so I'd never attended 2-year schools. So for me, I first had to just observe. And from that, once I had my mind around my amazing population of students and the population in the community and the pride and the joy that they have for their college, then I could come back to my Wesley Foundation and discern, well, what are we going to do in response to what I saw in the needs of my students and in the needs of the community. So that's kind of where I started, and I can share more details about specifically what I do, but I think what the general takeaway is that our ministry has become known as a place of empowerment for our students, and a place of calling for our students, and discernment, and a place of abundance of acceptance and hospitality. So, and hence the reason why, I've invited over to Navarro College on their campus and staff, because they want me to extend that to all potentially 9,000 students. So it's given this ministry a solid purpose in the community. And I think from that, we're having this conversation, right? Like it's kind of a practical way to do ministry with the population of students that we have right now. And I say that in terms of age and also race. We have a very diverse population of students, and that has just made ministry even more full and fulfilling. So
well, and I think especially for those schools that are known to be commuter schools, 2-year schools especially, I think you just have a different population of students. They just have different lives, and I think when you compare those to typical 4-year students that live on campus, they might have a campus job here or there, but have, on the whole, more free time. When you compare that to 2-year students who are usually sometimes working a full-time job, not living on campus, it's a different population to connect with, for sure. So
it is. And Navarro College has 4 campuses. So our Corsicana campus actually does have residential halls. We typically have 800 students that live on our campus. And then the other 3 campuses are your traditional commuter schools. So we really have a variety, and we just expanded our ministry over to a 2nd campus last year. So we're trying to grow that. But I was amazed at how our campus feels in terms of having resident students. It feels very similar to what I experienced as a freshman on a campus. So that's really unique in this particular location.
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle, I wonder if you can speak a little bit to some of the differences you have noticed in being in Paris and what that looks like for your two-year school people.
Yeah, so I've just finished up my second year here.
Yeah.
And so I kind of felt like I was starting to build up some like relationships, and then they went on spring break.
Mm-hmm.
So still in the early stages.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got here, I definitely I didn't go to a 2-year school either. And so a lot of it was kind of hearing the needs of the students and what they were wanting from their like 2-year education and hoping to achieve during their time here.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of just asking them like, what are ways that we can support you in, reaching the dreams and the goals that you're naming for, the experience that you want during your time here.
Yeah.
And I found that especially at a small time or a small city school,
Yeah.
It's different in the ways that things are accomplished in the big city. And so much is based on relationship building. And so a lot of my time and effort has gone into building relationships with like the administration and the people, the decision makers in the school, because it's not necessary. I'm not going to get an email about what's happening, but I can become friends with the person who's going to be sending out an email or not. They just say we do this every year, and so there's not an email. And so figuring out who those people are has been vital in kind of figuring out how things work and how you get things done in this environment.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I guess we're both Meredith and Michelle. Isn't it nice, all the M names? I just wonder kind of how do you see the specific like spiritual needs of these students that you have might be different or the same than we have on bigger campuses, and kind of how do you meet those needs for folks?
Go ahead, Michelle. I'll let you go first.
I don't know about making a big blanket statement. I just know for my students specifically, I have a lot of students who do not come from a religious background at all.
Yeah.
And so we've like created spaces where we can talk about hope or community or like bigger concepts that people could engage with, and then ask like, how does a higher power play into that? And like, what do you call that? And what does that look like? And so for me, it's been the first time that I've led these in-depth conversations with a group of people who don't identify as Christian. Yeah. And so I've like personally and myself been expanding ways that I can engage students in those conversations and not like kind of be off-putting by overly religious language, and create a space where they feel welcome into, and then like seeing where their heart is in it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thanks, Michelle. What about you, Meredith?
I agree with Michelle 100%. Like that is exactly, I would say, how I am experiencing my students. But this ministry pushed me to think way beyond even their spiritual needs. Like I address their spiritual needs. We'd have 50 people in Bible study, and they love that, and it's wonderful, and it's vibrant and wonderful. But what I started finding was there's more than just spiritual needs that feed into our spiritual health, if that makes sense. And so, again, I have probably 80% minorities in my ministry. So, and so many are coming with all kinds of course, many have, a traditional family system they come from. Many don't have a traditional family system they come from. So I feel like often I live out the spiritual pillars of our faith more than I even talk about them, and I demonstrate them and I show them what it looks like to be accepted, what it looks like to be loved, what it looks like to grow, what it looks like to be vulnerable and authentic in conversation. and what it looks like to live in community. And I guess spiritually, what I do and what I encourage my students to do is experiment. Like if we're talking about spiritual disciplines, and let's try 4 and see which one fits with you, right? Or if I push them as well to talk about social justice and social issues in our world, because I want our sanctuary and our space to be a place where they can have safe conversations and really explore those issues theologically. And so I feel like that's a spiritual need for my students, is to, 1, learn, and then 2, develop their own voice on issues around. And I think also I teach my students on how to serve others, how to think less of themselves and more about others in our Snapchat Insta world. Really, as basic as that sounds, it really is a spiritual growing edge for my students. And then I push my students to be leaders. I really empower them to not take their faith for granted. Like, you are created by God, and therefore you can do something with your life that makes this world a better place. And so I really push them to do that as well. So yes, all of that's under the umbrella of spiritual formation. But I quickly found that I had to go beyond, and this is not to put down Bible study, but I had to go beyond what I would consider a basic or a program that teaches, spirituality with the Bible and with worship. We do those things.
Yeah.
But I found I've gotten further into what I feel like we're called to do with these other things as well. So
yeah, Meredith, I think that's really true. And I think all of us that work in campus ministry recognize that a student cannot learn if they're hungry. A student cannot learn if, their living situation is really complicated and stressful and difficult. A student can't learn if they don't have clean clothes. Michelle has laundry facilities at her place. So there's so many other things that students are grappling with. I think, so many conversations that we've had over the years are about sexuality and about social justice and about all these other issues that, as you said, lean heavily into their spiritual life, but they have other things that we can meet their needs for. And I think just recognizing that they are a whole person and have lots of other things that we can meet and help them with in a safe environment, where they feel safe to ask questions and to be vulnerable and to really challenge themselves. And I think that's the wonderful opportunity of working with college students. And it's what I love about it, because they are in that environment to do that work. And I think that's really important. Thank you. Colleen, how is working with what we might imagine to be a more privileged population? What does that look like working at a big university? And I'm sure a lot of the needs are the same, but I'm sure that they have, very specific differences also.
Yeah, again, as you all well know, so I'm almost a year into this, and half of that has been Corona. And my location here is a little bit different. So I'm not running, so I'm not, although maybe I function as a chaplain in some ways, really I'm resourcing the folks that are doing the work.
Yeah.
Like we have 31 student groups, about half of those are Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have Roman Catholic, Orthodox, and Lutheran, Episcopalian, and then the rest I would categorize as evangelical, mm-hmm. Non-denominational. So I think all that to say, the nature of the work that I find myself doing right now is different than the work that I did as a chaplain.
Yeah.
And what I'm finding is, I assumed the folks here would be very different than the folks I worked with in, relatively rural Virginia, or upstate New York. But actually it's not that different. I mean, maybe maybe I think a greater percentage come from families that have really driven them academically in very specific and tailored ways, and in a to an extent that I have not experienced before. But other than that, like, they're just students.
Yeah.
You know, like they're my undergraduate students are, I mean, they're undergraduate students, you know, and their needs are similar. I think that here a lot more folks are residential because the Bay Area is the housing situation is hard, and so it's impossible for an undergraduate student to find housing, or really a graduate student outside of what is provided by the university, just because it's like a tech place here. Like normal houses are like millions and millions of dollars. Like it's immoral. But yeah, so I think I found that the students here are similar, and their needs, and particularly now in this pandemic crisis, the folks that remain on campus are folks that either do not have homes, or do not have safe homes, or international students that literally cannot go home because the borders are closed. And so I think that they're isolated, and so I really think are vulnerable in a lot of ways, in both spiritual and more holistic ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, as I think about students at Navarro College and students at Stanford, you would think that there would be a big difference between those students, but I think that they, you know, all students are doing about the same thing, no matter where they're located. When I went to college in a town that had, I don't know, 10 or 15,000 people, and the Walmart closed at 10 o'clock, and it was a dry county. And so, you know, I had a different experience going to college than the students that I work with who are in Austin, which is a big city that is, you know, always hopping, and there's always things to do. So I think, but so many of our experiences are very similar as we're trying to learn and figure out who we're going to be and all that important stuff. So I think that's a really good reminder. Meredith, what did your program look like kind of week to week before COVID?
Everything, or just like the
tell me all the things
leadership
you
part?
do.
So Sunday nights we would gather and kick off our week about 6:30. I ended up hiring a chef last year because the crowd grew so much I couldn't keep up. So we would eat dinner at 6:30, and 7 o'clock, from 7 to 8, we would have this space we call the chapel, and we would pack in there, and I would lead a Bible study, and then they would play ping pong till their heart was content and leave sometime that night. On Mondays, we did our traditional free lunch for students. So it was a pretty quiet day in terms of programming, but we would offer free lunch for 2 hours and have students come and go as they please. I'm just gonna give you the Corsicana campus right now. On Tuesdays, we would have a big day of programming. We would prepare for the evening where we would do what we call our Christian leadership for young adults, and they would also arrive for dinner at 6:30, and then from 7 to 8 we would cover one of our topics for that week, and we have a 4-semester rotation, so whatever the topic was that week. So we would do that activity, and then we would go immediately over to campus for a on-campus worship experience, which we called Amplified. And that is student-led with music and speakers or preachers. I have 4 to 6 interns that I pay through grants that we receive, and they become our leaders or our leaders for that service, and they also are small group leaders throughout the year. And Wednesdays, I would have baseball, Navarro College baseball. I'm the chaplain for them and the football team currently. And I would have them over to our building to also do the leadership program on their off seasons. And then on their on seasons, I would go and do a 15-minute devotional for them on Wednesdays. And on Thursdays, we had a couple of students that would do Bible study on their own with different groups around campus. So we had 2 to 3 small group Bible studies going on around campus. And then on Fridays, I would spend an hour or more with our Navarro College football team, teaching them life skills and leadership skills and spiritual health. So, and then of course, Saturdays in the fall, I'd be at football games, and then we'd start over again on Sunday. That pace was unmanageable after last fall, especially because we had a whole nother campus going in Waxahachie, where we served lunch to 250 people on Thursdays, and we had a small Bible study going as well on Tuesdays. And so we were supported through our conference to hire 2 individuals. So now we have a sports ministry director, and we have a Waxahachie Navarro College campus director. So hopefully this fall will be a little bit different. So
That's great.
we're very busy. When I came, we had 2 people in Bible study. So that's where we are. It still amazes me what we're doing. So.
Yeah. Meredith, can you tell me more about your leadership development? Kind of what does that look like? Do you have like a curriculum you follow, or did you write that, or what does that look like?
I just wrote that, to be honest. So with the grant from Texas Methodist Foundation and through a grant called Sam Taylor Grant Foundation, they funded this project. It's a 4-part project, and it's called Christian Leadership for Young Adults. It comes just from, like I said, that observation of who am I serving and the experiment of trying something. It also comes from a lot of my past experiences as a chaplain, as a spiritual director, and then just all my ministry experiences. I just saw so many places in young adult lives where I had learned something that was extremely helpful that they did not have access to. And so I just started teaching them some of these skills. It's based on also Eric Erickson's stage of making meaning of life. Of these students, they're in that age of they need to make meaning of the life around them to successfully continue to mature and grow. And so out of that, they're either, this is probably boring, but out of that, they're either going to flourish or flounder, right? So whatever tools that I have had the privilege to learn, I just pour into my students. And so in essence, what I discovered is there's 4 areas that I can help them in. And one is leadership. So we have a whole semester on Christian leadership. What does that look like? What does it look like to be served with courage? What does that look like with integrity, and just your basic leadership skills, and empowering them to do that. And then of course we talk about Christian service. What does that look like, you know, to develop that mindset of Martin Berber with the thou, you know, I see the holy in you if you see the holy in me, and how we see the world differently when we look through that lens. And in that one also we do genogram work, because I believe that you can't be free to serve until you've gone as far as you can go personally, or at least you're on that journey. And so we do a lot of genogram work in that semester. And then of course social justice, and we talk about, well, I mean, right now I've got more material than I could ever need, but for the past 3 or 4 years, I have been presenting to them different people who were made change. And historically, we know that young adults are the ones that create change in our world, period. And so I really worked to empower them that semester to be more aware of social justice, about equality over equity, about microaggressions, about just general awareness, kind of emotional health, about our presence in society and what that means and what we can do with that. And then we have a whole semester on spiritual practices, where we get intimate, small group, intimate in terms of like 8, no more than 8 small groups, your traditional spiritual practices, and we'll try one out every semester. I'm going to keep going just a little bit.
Yes,
so that's kind of the that's kind of the teaching piece of it,
Yeah.
but it has other pretty important components that I've discovered. So One is a lot of my students haven't traveled or experienced things beyond their towns. And so in order to help my students dream about maybe what Christ wants for them in life, I've found that travel is pretty essential to that. So we go, for the last 3 years, we've gone on what we call our civil rights pilgrimage, and we travel over one weekend in December, and one loop is through Little Rock, Arkansas, Memphis, Tennessee, and Jackson, Mississippi, and Philadelphia, Mississippi. And the other loop is all the way over to Selma, and then Montgomery, Alabama, and then come back through Jackson, Mississippi. And we talk to living legacies along the way, and of course stop at all the historical sites. But that's a really important piece of my program, I find. And then just a general spiritual retreat, which we go here in Texas to just a adventure camp place in February. Another thing I do throughout the program is bring in guest speakers to speak on the topic that we're talking about. So for instance, if we're talking about service, then I might bring in a CEO of a nonprofit. What does it look like to run a nonprofit that serves the others? The whole intent is to serve others. Or if we talk about spiritual practices, I have an amazing professor on campus that literally studies his Bible for 2 hours every day. He's done it for the last 30 or 40 years. And he comes in and speaks to our students about the importance of Bible study. And those guest speakers were important to me when I was a young adult, to hear from somebody that made it, that did it, and is doing it, right? Like somebody to help me cast my vision of, I will take one final one day and it will be the last final, and then I can go on about life. So that was inspiring. And then another thing that I do for my students is in terms of career discernment. So those that are not exposed to careers, they don't know what they can be. And so if my students want to, it's not mandatory, of course, but if they want to, I partner them with a business in town for them to experience the career of their choice. For instance, if they want to be an attorney, then I network with an attorney in town and just ask, can this student come and shadow you for 4 weeks this month? Or the CEO of our hospital was very helpful. He took our students through 8 weeks through every level of the hospital, from CEO to maintenance. And one student, University of Texas, she interned with our newspaper here, and she ended up getting the journalism school there at University of Texas, and she was a first-generation college student. And so those little things make a huge difference in their discernment, and I just feel like that's a big part of what our ministry does. And they come out empowered and focused and really ready for whatever they've been called to do. So it's a total encompassing program, and it takes a lot of energy, but it's not really that difficult once you get into the rhythm of it. So yeah. But it also takes, in the small town that we're in, it takes the community too. So I'm a big believer in asset-based community development. Like what do we have that we can share? So
yeah.
That's
Meredith,
the essence of it.
I love that. And I think that that's such a good model to recognize that the experiences that we have had that have shaped us, it's important that we share those with other people. Even, there's so many things that we have learned in books or from professors or from people that we've known that we just don't recognize the need to share that with other people. I think that's wonderful. Meredith, would you be willing to share that leadership development program? I would love to look at that. That sounds fascinating.
Absolutely. I'll just post the link in the chat over there.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Colleen, I wonder how, after doing the research you did on your book about church-based campus ministries, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how that might be a good kind of system for as we go forth in the Methodist Church and whatever that looks like, and kind of how that could both support those universities but also really help the church to find vision and focus and mission and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what Meredith shared really embodies that, how I feel about it, which is hyper-localized